It's been a big week in physio land. And here's the unfortunate reality that if your clinic, if your practice, if your business relies on third parties, gazetted fee structures, government money to survive, you are going to be stuck in this race in perpetuity. Every time a new financial year rolls around or a new government comes in, there's going to be changes to these type of policies, and it's going to be a very uncomfortable long-term space to be in. Harsh reality is this. I don't think anyone's surprised by what's happened with the NDIS this week, in the sense of we've all known they've wanted to cut rates, etc. I think what was surprising is that physiotherapy in particular has just been sliced, and it's viscerally offensive to anyone who practices physiotherapy, because what we are being told by the government is we are not as valuable as some of the other services. And I fundamentally disagree, to the point where, honest to God, I would very happily take that to the streets. And I said this in my last video. Good luck running disability and aged care without physiotherapists. This is bread and butter. This is what we are built for. Now, let's get through the biggest idea, though, which is that private paying patients do become the lifeblood of clinics. And I talked about this within the APA group when we were talking with the Nous group. From a private practice perspective, when we're assessing these cost structures like NDIS or like Medicare and whatnot, and they're going through them, I said, well, do you recognize the fact that for a lot of private businesses that take on this work, the private paying clients are actually subsidizing those gazetted fee structures? So we make more money off those private clients, and that enables us to see the occasional DVA patient, for example, or to bulk bill some Medicare appointments. That is how those two systems work in parallel, to get a nice equitable split where you get the upside of having more availability across multiple income streams without it cutting through your bottom line as heavily as it does. Now, if you're not diversified, if you just have one income stream, which is NDIS, or two income streams, NDIS and support at home, that's a bit concerning, because when these changes come in, like what has happened exactly now, you end up with this system just crashing down around you, and all of these cuts come through with basically no notice period, and you're stuck. You just have to learn to swim in that unfamiliar terrain. And I really feel for businesses who are facing this challenge, because it is not that easy to flip your operations in 3 weeks. And the reality is people have made reasonable decisions around hiring, around how they set up their businesses, around what areas they're servicing, based on the assumption that there's some degree of normality. Like, there is literally no other sector which would get 20 days notice, 19 days notice of massive overhauls and just be expected to comply with it, just be expected to go quietly. And without getting into the politics behind that, let's have a look at the fundamentals around the economics on this. What we're going to talk about today is unit economics. This is something that honestly, I was trying to push this with the barbell strategy in NDIS care at a macro level of, this is how I see physiotherapists with high levels of expertise actually being utilized well in that system. Probably didn't land as well as I would have liked, because I think it challenges the idea. We all want to be available to see anybody. Like, this is how I treated. I wasn't treating in my own practice as, the high level. I was, sleeves rolled up. I would see anybody. I would see DVA. I would see work cover, whatever. But there are ways to make that work. You run shorter appointments. You move some of those income streams across to more junior practitioners when there is a need, or if those clinicians are quiet and you want them to learn from some of these more potentially complex patients as well. It's not an unreasonable thing to do, but you have to support them through that. Yeah. The unit economics, though, if you are a highly skilled physiotherapist in an area like neurological rehab and you've got 20 years experience, you should be marketing yourself. You should be marketing to your highest scope, which means looking for the exact people who value someone with a lot of experience. And these people are out there because, believe it or not, there was a time before NDIS and people were paying for these services. There's always been a market of these private paying patients. And it might have come from a wealthy uncle or auntie or grandparents or whatever, but that market does exist. We shouldn't ignore that market and assume it's just going to be catered for by the heavily subsidized services that are now on offer under the NDIS, for example. And when I say subsidized, I mean by the sweat and tears of very experienced clinicians not getting paid for that work. What does that really look like? Well, in all honesty, what that looks like in a private clinic is going, well, if you are a new graduate, maybe you are seeing a higher percentage of Medicare consults, maybe no gap until you actually build your list up. Maybe you do see preferred provider programs in your first 6 months or something like that. These are strategies. I really don't like the preferred provider, but the Medicare gap thing can get diaries building up really nicely. Build as many revenue sources as possible and then grow your unique value proposition at the same time. So you shift from being third party loaded to unloaded with specific private paying patients who want exactly your skill set. The truth here, it does land somewhere in the middle. Like if you're a highly skilled clinician, you shouldn't be charging like a junior. You should not be accepting really poor rates for your services. In all honesty, you are better. The unit economics says you are better to farm that work out to other clinicians and actually just mentor and manage them. That's a better use of your time as that highly skilled person, because your reach, your impact can be across 5 different clinicians. And maybe you occasionally have to go out and do a joint assessment or something like that. And there are ways to work these things in to ensure clinical care is being delivered really, really well. The shift comes when you do start to see private paying patients, because I guarantee you, everybody who is running a home-based business, there is more potential for private paying patients than what you would believe, because there is a population known as the baby boomers who also happen to have all of the money that's ever been generated in Australia, pretty much. And they have hit the peak of their wealth and the bottom of their health, if that makes sense. So these are people whose main pain point is health and they have money. Unfortunately, that generation is heavily conditioned to expecting, very similar to the UK and the NHS model, they're heavily conditioned to expecting the government to provide these services. But if you can see the writing on the wall, you will see that generation is also going to recognize, hang on a minute, the government service is predominantly new graduates, predominantly inexperienced therapists. I'm old. I don't have that much time left. I just think it's probably worth paying to get someone who's really skilled to do this. And look, that's not every single boomer out there. Like I think 80% of them will just be like, look, I'll just sit on a waiting list. But that smaller group who have agency, who've got finance, who actually have bigger ticket goals, will probably jump at that opportunity. So you do have to be a bit daring. You do have to build your brand. You do have to build your personal brand as an experienced clinician. The failure point, I think we're already here, where there hasn't been a strategy to build any other revenue sources. And you get this revolving door of, okay, well, all we do is just add more clients, add more therapists, etc. And we just try and balance those two things. And then someone pulls the rug out from underneath. And that's pretty much where we are today. Without pricing, without positioning, without packaging or tracking or doing something to ensure the top line of your business, the revenue coming through, stays somewhat consistent. You can optimize as much as possible to get that top line up, but I think people have been trying that for some time. And I think the risks with that optimization, we all know, you end up with burnout amongst clinicians, because at the end of the day, these are often junior clinicians who probably don't have it's not a question of resilience, in my humble opinion. It's more about scope of practice. The further away from your scope of practice you are, the harder it is to maintain that for a long period of time. If it's easy work, you will find junior clinicians can just knock it out for 40 hours a week back to back. But this is not easy work. I don't think anyone in this sector, in physiotherapy land, thinks NDIS work is easy with complex patients. Occasionally, there might be someone who is straightforward. But guess what? They don't end up getting seen for very long. The complex patients, the complex care delivery is challenging, and it does lead to burnout. What I'm going to do for you guys, I'm running a webinar. It's on Thursday, the 26th of June. It's basically how to build a 20% profit clinic. It's showing how unit economics works, how diversification works, pricing psychology, basically how we actually build a business that funnels more private paying patients in, allows us to carry some of this. I'm not saying stop doing work in all these sectors, it'll destroy your business, but you've got to have a way to carry some of that lower billing staff and optimize your practice so you can grow out of this. If you're still waiting for someone else to fix your business, you're probably not going to find that that is an effective strategy. And in all honesty, and I don't want to be disrespectful to people, I do think that the best place to come is to people who have built businesses around private paying patients, not to people who've been sitting around playing inside the NDIS space. They are great for knowing how to manage the NDIS and knowing how to navigate those things. But this is where the rubber meets the road. And the road is basically saying, stop driving down that path and start pivoting. Hope to see you in the next session. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd love you to like and subscribe. If you're really keen on learning more, if you don't want to commit your time, jump into my circle page, have a look at some of the stuff I've built in there. It's a very small cost, one-time fee. You can get a good understanding of me. If you want to go further, come to this webinar and we'll take this idea from high level to eye level and we'll start getting profitable practices again, profitable businesses, and stress coming back down to earth. Hope to see you there Thursday, the 26th of June. Cheers.